build up over a long period of time that end up changing us actually biologically. The way to help to release, the most effective way to help to release it is through the body and senses and nervous system. When we talk it through, it can, if we're lucky, it can actually help us on that level, but it doesn't always reach that. I want to give you, and I want you to give others, complete freedom to be authentic and to take care of your needs. So if I invite you to do an activity and it doesn't feel right, or maybe halfway through you feel, well, my cup is full or running over, and you take some space, I totally support that. And in fact, you're doing the group a favour, because other people who are not sure if it's really all right to not do it will see, oh, they're sitting out, it's okay, it's fine, you can do that. You can take space, you can even go out for a little stroll if you need to. And if you want support from me or from the group, you can ask for it. Because the activity, be it dance, singing, drumming, storytelling, whatever the activity is, it's a means to an end. And the end is to do with compassion and humanity. So let's serve that end. It means you can interrupt your dance halfway through and say, I'm struggling. Because that's more important than getting to the end of the dance. Sweeties. So I'm going to assume that different people have got different personal experience of trauma, either your own or other people's or both, and that people have got different understanding, and you know that some of you might be extremely well versed on all the theory, but I'm going to cover it as briefly as I can. So when people started to get particularly interested in trauma was, you probably know, it was when war veterans came home and they didn't bounce back in the way that people thought that they would. Shell shock was one of the terms that they used for it at first. And also there was the word malingerer. There was this, in America, it's like, well, why are all these Vietnam people who survived Vietnam War malingering? They're not going back to work, they're just hanging out at home like zombies watching a telly. They didn't really understand it. But in looking for understanding, they came up with the idea, they came up with the realization that certain extreme, overwhelming events couldn't be processed the way that other shocks and stresses are processed. Because life is full of ups and downs and shocks and stresses, but mostly, sooner or later, we find a way of processing them. And when something's absolutely overwhelming in intensity, the mind and memory and body record it differently. It's so toxic that it can't go into the normal memory file where we simply recall things. It's very deep, and we know now that traumatic experience can affect us on a cellular level, and it affects every part of life. If people have digestive problems, insomnia problems, chronic pain, chronic anxiety, depression, it might well have, and it often seems to have, a trauma connection. That trauma might be early infancy, it might be specific events, it can be what's known as secondary trauma or gratuitous trauma. Don't really like that term. If you're a firefighter, say, or you're in the first line of defense and you're witnessing other people's tragic circumstances, that secondary trauma can affect you very strongly. There are many ways it can happen. And increasingly it's been thought that it's not all about dramatic events, it can be a whole series of things. For example, that in your childhood you were never really seen or heard or cuddled, and that seems to affect us in somewhat similar biological ways. And the similarity is that we contract. And this is the best thing we can do at the time. And the The only difficulty is that we don't always know, and rarely do know, how to unwind that pattern once it gets deeply lodged in us. So the pattern of fear, contraction, and being very easily activated by something that triggers a memory or a feeling is really what we now understand as trauma. But I want to add a little bit to that, because I'm very interested in, and this is a more recent way of perceiving things, what could be called collective trauma or systemic trauma. In other words, it's not just about individuals and our individual stories, but it's about all of our collective interactions as a community, as a global society, and how they impact on us and one another. And I want to read you a little thing that I wrote yesterday. Can we cure cascading trauma? I'm just going to say cascading. What do you understand by cascading? It's when one thing leads to another and another, and it becomes like a sort of vicious circle that keeps feeding itself. So can we cure cascading trauma? Long before social lockdown, we invented emotional lockdown. Started when we slid down from leafy jungle fronds, tottering on two legs, got civilized, and despised primitive primate passions, burying them under shame, schooling only the brain. Oh, what a bright, brilliant brain! We designed 1,000 exquisite ways to eliminate one another. Our astounding talent for tenderness and devotion sabotaged time after time by fear arising from oppression. Rewiring happy hearts to grow cactus spines and participate in paranoia. The sea of collective trauma we all swim in is so familiar that distress seems normal. Fortunately, this nightmare is curable. We have resources to co-create a cascade of caring, a new culture of compassion. Let's dance with possibilities. But just to say it in very ordinary words, we've got a long history of war and control and inequality, and all these things very naturally induce feelings of anxiety and insecurity, which contribute to the sort of the texture, the shared texture that we have of living in a rather defended, anxious way. It might be an extremely defended, anxious way, and no criticism. It's a very natural, even a healthy response to an environment that feels dangerous. When that becomes human culture, it perpetuates itself, it becomes a cascade. So one reason I'm very interested in group work, it actually isn't practical to think of supplying 3 years of therapy to each and every adult and child in, let's say, a refugee community, or all of us in society. And I'm very interested in ways that as a group we can become our own self-supporting, rejuvenating group. Not as a mass, but in small circles like this, in circles like the Inside Out creative groups, where we generate positive feelings, we become supporters for one another, and we create resilience to get through trauma. So that's my special interest in this, and I'd like to pass on as many resources as I can, or share them with you. literally soak in the mother's face and movements if we've got that kind of connection. And it's a very positive feeling. So that feeling of either mirroring or being mirrored takes us back into a very positive feeling if we ever had that in the first place, which we hope we have. And it might also bring up the opposite, because sometimes when things have been missing that we need on that deep level, then it kind of triggers or activates that need. So don't be surprised in any of these exercises if it activates some pain or, that awareness of what your soul needs, as it were. Thing that brings joy to one person isn't going to hit the receptors for another. And in terms of dancing, then it's almost like cats and dogs, and there are some people that love both cats and dogs. But some people really relate to dancing where you don't have to have any instructions, you don't have anybody else's plan imposed on you, and it comes from inside, and you've got the freedom to follow what arises. And for other people, be they cats or dogs, I'm not sure, the structure supports and gives them something to do, and it gives them a plan, and they're not required to find it or to sort of invent it. And it feels very, it feels safe and kind of enjoyable to be given the pattern, and it also extends the possibilities of movements and steps that are part of your vocabulary. And I'm lucky to be both cat and dog. I love free dance and I love structured dance. So as I was thinking about this, I thought let's actually create a model that kind of roughly summarizes the different forms of dance and the potentials for dance. So to the model of intuitive dance, coming from inside, free and unstructured, I use the word cultural dance for dances that have a particular sequence. A lot of them do come from a culture. It may be salsa, it may be Balkan folk dance, but there's a sort of a cultural element, and it also gives the possibility of us all moving together as one body. So there are cultural dances which have a whole set of, from my point of view, what would you say, was trauma antidote properties, and also intuitive arising dances that have another set of healing and holding properties. And I wanted to add a third one, which I call somatic dances, because in the world of trauma therapy, there's a growing body of somatic, in other words, body-based exercises that can help and support. These involve breathing, tapping, eye movements, and sensing what's inside. And the only limitation that I see in the ones that I've met is that they're a little bit boring. And to practice them on a daily basis for some people is a chore, and maybe we don't want to get round to doing the things that we think we ought to do. So I've been putting them into dance form with music and rhythm to give another option for people like me who've got low boredom threshold and don't often do the things I should do, but do the things I want to do. I'm trying to put the somatic exercises in a form that makes them yummy. So I will introduce what I'm calling now somatic dances, and it's just a way of saying that with music and movement and rhythm, we are incorporating some of the somatic exercises and hoping that will make them more palatable and joyful, of all kinds. Conversation, food. The world is full of things that are not only pleasurable but therapeutic. And to me, dance doesn't exist in isolation. If people gather together to dance, and you can add any of those ingredients, visual, edible, natural, add them in, because everyone's got different receptors and will be fed by different things. So why, with all these possibilities, why should I or you be particularly interested in movement and dance? So my personal journey has shown to me the value of dancing, and I do believe that whatever movements you're capable of, a lot of the dance is what happens inside when there's music and there's the atmosphere of fluidity that dancing offers. It's not all about, for sure, what you're showing outwardly. It's about this dance, this dance, this dance.
Also, what you said, I think earlier was very apt, that when we have fear, we tend to contract, and I think dance and movement helps us expand in both ways, physically, emotionally. For me, that's very important.
There's a word flow which is used very freely, but to me the word coherence is also useful. That when we're stressed, anxious, or traumatized, it's very hard to find coherence. It's as if everything is fragmented inside. And music is full of coherences, dance is full of coherences. And we see with research about people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's and so on, and I'll tell you in a minute about stroke recovery thing. All these, music and dance help us to recover coherences and help us to find coherence in the chaos. So I just want to quickly tell you about, I've got a friend called Jen Lana who works in Bury St Edmunds in a stroke recovery unit. She's one of a number of people that offer activities, and she offers circle dancing. Some of the people there don't have much movement, so she has a great big elastic rope that can embrace the group together. And some of them will hold the rope by their hands, and somebody that just goes round the back of their chairs. But the manager of the project said that there are two reasons that they love the dancing. One is that they enjoy the music and the sort of friendly vibe, and the other is that afterwards they seem to be more coherent. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, for example, after a stroke, it's not just that language sometimes gets lost, but you kind of easily forget what you're doing. You start drinking a cup of tea and you're just sitting there with it like that. It's as if they forget what they're doing. And she notices that after the dance sessions there's a lot more coherence. And that set me thinking about flow and coherence. But I think the old societies where everybody danced must have instinctively known about this thing called co-regulation, which is enormously soothing and comforting when you're feeling anxious and isolated. It can happen in the circle. And every single member of the circle is strengthening every other member of the circle. And in a traditional setting, people don't dance all the time. They'll sit out, have a chat, come into the dance, sit out again. It's not like a class where people are doing all the dances, but there's a sense of a sort of a continuum. It's a rotating continuum, the circle of humanity. And I think it's deeply reassuring and nourishing to be in that situation. That's been my experience. As well as the fact that we have this interesting thing that we're on our own individual journey. Everybody's an individual, but we feel a connection with the collective. We're not isolated as an individual. So this is just me sharing my experience and my thoughts, and we'll see as we try some of these things out what your experience is. It might be a different one.